The classroom was silent, but not the kind of silence that felt peaceful. It was the kind that made your skin crawl like the air itself was holding its breath. I shifted in my seat, the cold metal chair digging into my back, and glanced around the room. My classmates weren't human. None of them were. They were aliens, each one more bizarre than the last. Some had shimmering scales, others had too many eyes, and a few looked like they'd been plucked straight out of a nightmare. But here's the thing, they weren't scary. Not really. Not until today. It all started when Professor Xyloth, a towering figure with tentacles for arms and a voice that sounded like gravel in a blender, wrote a single word on the holographic board: Hippopotamus. I remember stifling a laugh. Out of all the words in the universe, why that one? It sounded ridiculous even to me. But then I noticed something strange. The room, already quiet, went deathly still. My alien classmates, who usually chattered in their strange, guttural languages, froze. Their eyes, or whatever they used to see, widened. Some of them even trembled, their strange bodies shaking like leaves in a storm. I didn't get it. It was just a word. A word about a big, chubby animal from Earth. What was the big deal? I leaned over to the student next to me, a slender being with skin that glowed faintly in the dark. "Hey, what's going on? Why is everyone freaking out?" I whispered. They didn't answer. Instead, they recoiled, their glow flickering like a dying light bulb. It was then that I realized something was very, very wrong. This wasn't just about a word. This was about something deeper, something darker. And somehow, I was at the center of it. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Professor Xyloth's tentacles twitched as he stared at me, his many eyes narrowing. "Human," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you know what this word means?" I nodded, confused. "Yeah, it's a big animal from my planet." "Why?" The room erupted in hushed whispers, the aliens exchanging looks I couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Disgust? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I'd stumbled into something I didn't understand, something that made my alien classmates, who'd always treated me with a mix of curiosity and indifference, look at me like I was a monster. Before I could ask more questions, the bell rang, a sharp, echoing sound that made everyone jump. My classmates practically bolted out of the room, their strange forms moving faster than I'd ever seen. I stayed behind, my mind racing. What was it about that word? What did it mean to them? And why did it feel like I'd just unlocked a door I wasn't supposed to open? As I packed up my things, Professor Xyloth approached me. His towering frame loomed over me, casting a long shadow. "Human," he said, his voice softer now but no less intense. "Be careful. There are things about your world, about your kind, that you do not yet understand. The word you know as hippopotamus. It is not just a word to us. It is a warning." And with that, he turned and left, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about Earth, about aliens, and about myself. Because the truth was, the word hippopotamus wasn't just a word. It was a key. A key to a secret so terrifying that even the bravest of my alien classmates trembled at the sound of it. And now that key was in my hands. But what was I supposed to do with it? And more importantly, what would happen when I found out the truth? The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on my other classes, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment in Professor Xyloth's classroom. The way my classmates had reacted, the way they'd looked at me, it was like I'd suddenly become something else in their eyes. Something dangerous. Something they feared. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something huge, something that everyone else seemed to know but me. During lunch, I sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at the strange, gelatinous food the school provided. Normally, I'd try to strike up a conversation with someone, anyone, just to feel less out of place. But today no one would even look at me. The few times I caught someone's eye, they quickly looked away, their faces, or whatever passed for faces, filled with something I could only describe as dread. It was isolating in a way I hadn't felt since my first day here, when I'd been the only human in a sea of aliens. Back then I'd been a curiosity. Now I was something else entirely. I thought about reaching out to Professor Xyloth, asking him to explain what he'd meant. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at me, like he was both warning me and testing me at the same time. Or maybe it was the fear that once I knew the truth, I wouldn't be able to go back to the way things were. Ignorance, as they say, is bliss. But I wasn't sure I could live with not knowing, not when it felt like the answer was just out of reach. That night, I lay in my dorm room, staring at the ceiling. The room was small and sparse, with only a bed, a desk, and a few personal items to remind me of home. Outside, the twin moons of this alien world cast an eerie glow through the window, painting the walls in shades of silver and blue. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the word hippopotamus written in bold, glowing letters, and I felt that same chill run down my spine. I grabbed my tablet and started searching for answers. The school's database was vast, filled with information from countless worlds and species. But no matter how many variations of the word I typed in, hippopotamus, river horse, even the scientific name Hippopotamus amphibius, I found nothing. It was like the word didn't exist outside of Earth. And yet, it had clearly meant something to my classmates. Something big. Frustrated, I tossed the tablet aside and got up, pacing the room. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it some kind of code word? A symbol of something greater? Or was it tied to Earth's history in a way I didn't understand? I thought about all the stories I'd heard growing up about humanity's place in the universe. We were supposed to be the underdogs, the newcomers who'd barely made it to the stars. But what if there was more to it than that? What if we were something else entirely? The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. If I couldn't find answers in the database, maybe I could find them in person. I waited until after class when the halls were mostly empty, and then made my way to the library. It was a massive, sprawling place, with shelves that stretched up to the ceiling and rows upon rows of books, data crystals, and holographic displays. I'd only been there a few times before, but I knew it was the best place to start. I wandered through the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The librarian, a tall, insect-like alien with too many legs, watched me from behind a desk but didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if they recognized me or if they were just being polite, but I didn't care. I had a mission. After what felt like hours, I found a section dedicated to Earth. It was small, tucked away in a corner like an afterthought, but it was something. I pulled out a few books and started flipping through them, looking for anything that might explain why the word hippopotamus had such an effect on my classmates. Most of the books were filled with basic information, geography, history, culture, but nothing stood out. Then, near the bottom of the pile, I found something different. It was an old leather-bound book with a title etched in gold, The Forgotten Chronicles of Earth. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, like it had been passed down through generations. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, the pages crackling with age. The text was in a language I didn't recognize, but there were illustrations, vivid, detailed drawings of creatures and landscapes that looked both familiar and alien. And then, on one of the pages I saw it, a drawing of a hippopotamus. But it wasn't like any hippopotamus I'd ever seen. This one was massive, its body covered in strange, glowing symbols. Its eyes burned with an intensity that made my stomach churn, and its mouth was open in a roar that seemed to leap off the page. Beneath the drawing was a single line of text, written in a language I couldn't read. I stared at it, my hands trembling. What was this? And why did it feel like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see? I was so absorbed in the book that I didn't notice the librarian approaching until they were right behind me. That book, they said, their voice a low, buzzing hum, is not for students. I jumped, nearly dropping the book, and turned to face them. Their multiple eyes bore into me, unblinking. I didn't know, I stammered. I was just curious. The librarian reached out and gently took the book from my hands. Curiosity is dangerous, they said, especially when it comes to Earth. They closed the book and tucked it under one of their many arms. You should forget what you saw here. For your own sake. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but something in their tone stopped me. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it wasn't a suggestion either. It was a warning, one that sent a chill down my spine. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak, and watched as they walked away, the book disappearing into the shadows of the library. As I left, my mind was racing. What was in that book? And why was it so forbidden? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend I'd never seen the word hippopotamus, or the strange, glowing creature in the book. But another part of me, a deeper, more insistent part, knew I couldn't. I had to find out the truth no matter the cost. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. But this time, I wasn't just thinking about the word or the book. I was thinking about Earth, about humanity, about all the things we didn't know about ourselves. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming, it was going to change everything. But for better or worse, I had no idea. All I knew was that I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to the truth. And so, with a deep breath, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would dig deeper. I would find out what the word hippopotamus really meant, and why it had the power to make an entire classroom of aliens tremble. Even if it meant risking everything. Even if it meant facing something I wasn't ready for. Because the truth was out there waiting for me. and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in a long time. The mystery of the word hippopotamus had consumed me and I knew I couldn't let it go. But I also knew I had to be careful. The librarian's warning still echoed in my mind, and the way my classmates had reacted was a constant reminder that I was treading on dangerous ground. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than me, bigger than any of us. And if I didn't figure it out, who would? I decided to start with the one person who might actually give me answers. Professor Zyloth. He'd been the one to write the word on the board, the one who'd warned me about its significance. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. But approaching him wouldn't be easy. He wasn't exactly the warm, approachable type, and after the way he'd looked at me in class, I wasn't sure he'd even be willing to talk. Still, I had to try. I waited until after his lecture, when most of the students had filed out of the room. He was at the front, packing up his things, his tentacles moving with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic. I took a deep breath and walked up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Professor," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" He turned to look at me, his many eyes narrowing. For a moment he didn't say anything and I wondered if he was going to ignore me altogether. Then he sighed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very core of his being. "I suppose you have questions," he said, his voice low and measured. "About the word." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Yes. I don't understand why it had such an effect on everyone. And I found this book in the library." I stopped myself, realizing I might have said too much. His expression darkened, and I could see a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear? Anger? I couldn't tell. "You should not have done that," he said, his voice sharp. "There are things about your world, about your kind, that are better left buried. The word, hippopotamus, is not just a word. It is a symbol. A warning. And now that you've seen it, now that you know, there's no going back." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't back down now. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it scare everyone so much?" He hesitated, his tentacles twitching nervously. Then he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because it is tied to something ancient, something powerful. Something that should never have been awakened. And now, because of your curiosity, it may be too late." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What are you talking about? What's going to happen?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, intricately carved box. It was made of a dark, polished wood, with strange symbols etched into its surface. He handed it to me, his expression grave. "Take this," he said. "But be careful. What's inside is both a key and a curse. Use it wisely." I took the box, my hands trembling. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of something far greater than its size. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You'll know when the time comes," he said. "But remember this, the word hippopotamus is not just a word. It is a call. And now that it has been spoken, it cannot be unheard." I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but he turned away before I could say anything else. "Go," he said, his voice firm. "And whatever you do, do not speak the word again. Not until you are ready." I left the classroom feeling more confused than ever. The box in my hands felt like a ticking time bomb, and I had no idea what to do with it. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to the truth. That night I sat in my dorm room staring at the box. The symbols on its surface seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. I knew I should wait, should think things through, but the curiosity was too much. I had to know what was inside. I opened the box slowly, my hands shaking. Inside was a small, circular object made of a strange, metallic material. It looked like a coin, but it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The surface was covered in intricate patterns, and in the center was a single symbol, the same one I'd seen in the book, the one that had been etched into the hippopotamus's skin. As soon as I touched it, a jolt of energy shot through me, and I felt a strange, almost magnetic pull. It was as if the coin was alive, calling to me, urging me to do something. But what? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore it. I held the coin tightly, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do with it? Where was it leading me? And what would happen if I followed? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't turn back now. The word hippopotamus had set something in motion, something I couldn't control. And now I had no choice but to see it through. As I sat there, clutching the coin, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Something was coming. Something big. And whatever it was going to change everything. But for better or worse I had no idea. All I knew was that I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, and there was no turning back. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The word, the coin, the warnings, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. And as I sat there, staring at the glowing symbol in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into a world I wasn't ready for. But I had no choice. The word had been spoken, the call had been made, and now there was no going back. The coin in my hand grew warmer, almost as if it was reacting to my touch. The symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and I could feel a strange energy radiating from it. My mind raced with questions, but before I could even begin to process what was happening, a sharp knock at my door jolted me back to reality. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could it be? It was late and no one ever came to my dorm this late. I hesitated, clutching the coin tightly, and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, just another knock, louder this time, more insistent. My stomach churned as I slowly got up and walked to the door. I peered through the small frosted window, but the figure standing outside was just a shadow, tall and imposing. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. Something about this felt wrong, but I couldn't just ignore it. I opened the door, and there stood a figure I didn't recognize. They were human, or at least they looked human. But there was something off about them, something I couldn't quite place. Their eyes were too sharp, their movements too precise, like they were trying too hard to seem normal. They wore a long dark coat that seemed to blend into the shadows, and their expression was unreadable. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," they said, their voice low and cold. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I instinctively took a step back, my grip tightening on the coin. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the way they looked at me, like they could see right through me, made my skin crawl. They stepped forward, their presence filling the doorway. "The coin," they said, their tone sharp and demanding. "Give it to me. Now." I shook my head, my heart racing. "No. I don't even know what it is. Why do you want it?" Their expression darkened, and for a moment, I thought they might force their way in. But then they smiled, a cold, humorless smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't understand what you're holding," they said. "That coin is a relic, a key. And in the wrong hands, it could unleash something you can't even imagine." I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If it's so dangerous, why won't anyone explain it to me?" They tilted their head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. "Because you're not ready to know," they said. "But if you keep digging, if you keep holding on to that coin, you'll find out soon enough. And trust me, you won't like what you discover." Before I could respond, they turned and walked away, their coat billowing behind them. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? And why did they seem so afraid of the coin? I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The coin felt heavier in my hand now, like it was weighing me down. I looked at it again, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light of my room. What was this thing? And why did everyone, Professor Zyloth, the librarian, now this stranger, seem so terrified of it? I knew I should put it down, should lock it away and forget about it. But I couldn't. The curiosity was too strong, the pull too intense. It was like the coin was calling to me, urging me to uncover its secrets. And despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind, I couldn't ignore it. I sat back down on my bed, staring at the coin. The symbols seemed to shift and swirl as if they were alive. I felt a strange connection to it, like it was tied to me in some way I couldn't understand. And then, without thinking, I did something I knew I shouldn't. I spoke the word. Hippopotamus. The moment the word left my lips, the room seemed to shift. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and the light flickered like a dying bulb. The coin in my hand began to vibrate, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter until they were almost blinding. I tried to drop it, but it was like my hand was glued to it, the energy coursing through me like a shockwave. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room went silent, the light stabilized, and the coin fell still. But something had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed to stretch and twist. Something had been awakened, something I couldn't see but could sense all around me. I sat there, trembling, my mind racing. What had I done? What had I unleashed? And more importantly, how was I going to fix it? The knock at the door came again, louder this time, more urgent. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the coin, knowing that whatever was coming, I was at the center of it. The word had been spoken, the call had been made, and now there was no turning back. The stakes had been raised, the tension thicker than ever. And as I sat there, waiting for whatever was coming next, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to face something far beyond my understanding. Something ancient. Something powerful. Something that had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. And I had no idea if I was ready for it. The knocking at the door grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The coin in my hand felt like it was burning now, the symbols glowing so brightly they seared into my vision. I wanted to scream, to throw it away, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. The air in the room grew heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on me. And then, with a final, deafening crash, the door burst open. Standing in the doorway was not the stranger from before. It was Professor Xyloth. His towering frame filled the space, his tentacles writhing like live wires. His many eyes were wide, frantic, and for the first time, I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Fear. Real raw fear. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt like it was closing up, my chest tight with panic. The coin was vibrating again, the symbols pulsing with a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. And then, from somewhere deep within the room, I heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't coming from Professor Xyloth. It wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the shadows. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and then the shadows themselves seemed to come alive. They twisted and writhed, forming shapes that defied logic, long, sinewy limbs, glowing eyes, a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth. It was the creature from the book, the one I'd seen etched into the pages. The hippopotamus. But it wasn't just a hippopotamus. It was something else, something ancient and terrible, something that shouldn't exist. Professor Xyloth stepped forward, his tentacles lashing out as if to shield me. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice trembling. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." But it was too late. The creature lunged, its massive form moving with a speed that belied its size. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling to the floor. The coin slipped from my hand, clattering to the ground, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The creature froze, its glowing eyes fixed on the coin. And then, slowly, it turned its gaze to me. I felt a wave of terror wash over me as it stepped closer, its massive form looming over me. I could feel its breath, hot and rancid, on my skin. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end, but it never came. Instead, I heard a voice, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You called," it said, the words reverberating in my skull. "And now you must answer." I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. The creature was still there, but it wasn't attacking. It was waiting. Waiting for me to speak, to do something. But what? I didn't know. I didn't understand. All I knew was that I had to do something, anything, to stop this. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "The coin," it said. "It is a key. A key to a door that should never be opened. And you, human, have unlocked it." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." The creature let out a low, rumbling growl. "Ignorance is no excuse. The door is open, and now the balance must be restored." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I had to try. I reached for the coin, my hand shaking as I picked it up. The symbols were glowing brighter than ever, the energy radiating from it almost unbearable. And then, without thinking, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw it. The coin flew through the air, spinning end over end, and landed in the creature's open maw. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a deafening roar, the creature began to dissolve. Its form twisted and writhed, the shadows that made up its body unraveling like threads. The glowing eyes dimmed, the growl faded, and then, with a final ear-splitting shriek, it was gone. The room fell silent. The air grew still. I sat there, trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Professor Xyloth stepped forward, his tentacles retracting as he knelt beside me. "You did it," he said, his voice soft but filled with awe. "You restored the balance." I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears. "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his many eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "An ancient guardian," he said. "A protector of the balance between worlds. The word, hippopotamus, is not just a word. It is a call, a summoning. And the coin is the key. You were never supposed to find it. But now that you have, You must understand the responsibility that comes with it. I shook my head, my mind reeling. I don't understand. What responsibility? He placed a tentacle on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. The responsibility to protect the balance, he said. To ensure that the door remains closed. You have been chosen human. Whether you like it or not, this is your destiny. I wanted to argue, to protest, but I couldn't. The weight of his words settled over me, heavy and inescapable. I had stumbled into something far bigger than myself, something I couldn't even begin to understand. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As I sat there, staring at the spot where the creature had been, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't run from it. The word had been spoken, the call had been made, and now, it was up to me to answer. But as I stood up, brushing myself off, I noticed something on the floor where the coin had landed. It was a small, intricately carved box, the same one Professor Xyloth had given me earlier. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and opened it. Inside was a single piece of parchment, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. And at the bottom, written in bold, unmistakable letters, was a single word. Hippopotamus. The final twist. The door wasn't closed. Not completely. And now, it was up to me to finish what I had started. The story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The parchment felt heavy in my hands, the weight of its meaning pressing down on me like a physical force. The word hippopotamus stared back at me, its letters stark and unyielding. I glanced up at Professor Xyloth, who was still kneeling beside me, his expression a mix of relief and lingering dread. What does this mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought it was over. I thought I fixed it. Professor Xyloth's tentacles twitched, and he let out a long, weary sigh. You did what you could, he said, his voice low and measured. But the balance is fragile. The door you opened, it cannot be fully closed. Not by you, not by anyone. The best we can do is ensure it remains guarded. And now, that responsibility falls to you. I shook my head, my mind reeling. Me? But I don't even understand what's happening. How am I supposed to guard something I don't even understand? He placed a tentacle on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. You will learn, he said. Just as I did. Just as others before us have. The word, hippopotamus, is not just a word. It is a legacy. A duty. And now it is yours to carry. I wanted to argue, to protest, but the look in his many eyes stopped me. There was no malice there, no judgment. Only a deep, unshakable resolve. He believed in me even if I didn't believe in myself. And somehow that made it harder to refuse. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into understanding the world I had stumbled into. Professor Xyloth became my guide, teaching me the history of the balance, the role of the guardians, and the significance of the coin. It was overwhelming, to say the least. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I truly knew. The balance between worlds was a delicate thing, maintained by a network of guardians across the universe. And now I was one of them. The coin, I learned, was more than just a key. It was a symbol of the guardian's duty, a reminder of the power and responsibility we carried. The symbols etched into its surface were ancient, a language lost to time, but they held the secrets of the balance. And the word hippopotamus, it was more than just a call. It was a warning, a reminder of the consequences of disrupting the balance. As I delved deeper into my training, I began to notice changes in myself. The coin, which had once felt foreign and heavy in my hand, now felt like an extension of me. The symbols, once indecipherable, began to make sense. And the word no longer filled me with fear. It was a part of me now as much as my own heartbeat. But with this newfound understanding came a growing sense of unease. The balance was fragile, and there were forces at work that sought to disrupt it. The stranger who had come to my door that night was just one of many. There were others, beings who craved the power the coin represented, who would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. And now they knew about me. I tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on my training. But the fear lingered, a constant shadow at the edge of my mind. I knew it was only a matter of time before I would be tested. And when that time came, I had to be ready. The test came sooner than I expected. One night, as I was studying the symbols on the coin, I felt a familiar pull, a tug at the edge of my consciousness. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, more insistent. I knew what it was. The door. It was calling to me. I followed the pull, letting it guide me through the darkened halls of the school and out into the night. The twin moons cast an eerie glow over the landscape, their light reflecting off the strange alien plants that dotted the ground. I walked until I reached a clearing, where the air seemed to hum with energy. And there, in the center of the clearing, was the door. It wasn't a physical door, not in the traditional sense. It was more like a tear in the fabric of reality, a shimmering, pulsating rift that seemed to stretch endlessly into the void. I could feel the power radiating from it, a raw, untamed energy that made my skin prickle. And standing in front of it was the stranger from before. They turned to face me, their expression unreadable. "I told you to give me the coin," they said, their voice cold and sharp. "But you didn't listen. And now, you've made this harder than it needs to be." I clenched my fists, the coin warm in my hand. "I'm not giving it to you," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my chest. "This isn't yours to take." They smiled, a cold, humorless smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "We'll see about that," they said, and then they lunged. The fight was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The stranger moved with a speed and precision that defied logic, their attacks relentless and brutal. I barely had time to react, let alone fight back. But as the battle raged on, something inside me shifted. The coin's energy surged through me, guiding my movements, amplifying my strength. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the balance, for the worlds that depended on it. In the end, it was the word that saved me. As the stranger closed in, their eyes gleaming with triumph, I spoke it. "Hippopotamus." The effect was immediate. The stranger froze, their expression twisting in shock and fear. The air around us seemed to crackle with energy, and then, with a deafening roar, the rift began to close. The stranger let out a scream, their form dissolving into shadows as the door sealed shut. I stood there, trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The clearing was silent now, the air still and heavy. The door was gone, the balance restored. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. The stranger was just one of many, and there would be others who sought to disrupt the balance. But for now, at least, the door was closed. As I made my way back to the school, the coin warm in my hand, I felt a strange sense of peace. The fear was still there, lingering at the edges of my mind, but it was tempered by a newfound resolve. I had faced the unknown, and I had emerged stronger for it. The word hippopotamus was no longer a source of fear. It was a reminder of the power I carried, the responsibility I bore. And I knew no matter what came next, I would be ready. The story doesn't end here. It never really ends. The balance is a constant, ever-shifting thing, and the guardian's duty is never truly done. But for now, the door is closed. The word has been spoken, the call has been answered. And I, the human who stumbled into this world by accident, am now its protector. As I walked back into the school, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, I felt a sense of purpose I had never known before. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I was ready. The word hippopotamus was no longer just a word. It was my legacy, my duty, and I would carry it with pride.